The terminal buzzed with the familiar hum of pre-flight activity. Passengers shuffled through the boarding gate, some clutching their tickets nervously, others chatting animatedly on their phones. Flight 327 to Seattle was about to depart, and the air was thick with the blend of excitement and anticipation that accompanied any journey. The sleek, silver aircraft gleamed under the floodlights, its engines humming with restrained power as the last of the luggage was stowed away. Captain Ethan Riley stood in the cockpit, performing his final checks. A seasoned pilot with over 15 years of experience, he had an almost instinctive understanding of his aircraft. He exchanged a brief glance with his co-pilot, Olivia Hayes, who was meticulously reviewing the flight plan. "Looks like smooth skies all the way," she remarked, her tone light but focused. Ethan nodded, his gaze shifting to the instrument panel. Everything was in order. The flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, guiding passengers to their seats and ensuring that everyone was settled. Amanda, the lead attendant, smiled warmly at a young boy clutching a stuffed bear. "First time flying?" she asked. The boy nodded, his wide eyes betraying a mix of fear and wonder. "Don't worry," she said softly. "It's like a roller coaster, but smoother." The boy's mother gave Amanda a grateful smile as she adjusted her son's seatbelt. In the business class cabin, a man in a crisp suit furrowed his brow at his laptop screen, typing furiously as though the fate of the world depended on his email. Across the aisle, an elderly woman leafed through a well-worn travel guide, murmuring about the art galleries she planned to visit. Further back in economy, a group of college students laughed loudly, their energy filling the confined space. Near the window, a middle-aged man gazed out at the tarmac, his expression distant and unreadable. The intercom crackled, and Ethan's steady voice filled the cabin. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 327 with service to Seattle. We're expecting a smooth flight tonight, with clear skies and a pleasant temperature of 65 degrees upon arrival. Our estimated flight time is 3 hours and 40 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey." As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, the vibrations beneath the passengers' feet seemed to intensify the reality of their journey. Amanda walked down the aisle one last time, checking seatbelts and tray tables. She noticed a man near the emergency exit seat fiddling with his phone. "Sir, I'll need you to switch that to airplane mode now," she said gently but firmly. He complied with a sheepish smile, muttering something about forgetting. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane positioned itself on the runway. The roar of the engines grew louder, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to reverberate through every corner of the aircraft. For a brief moment, there was silence, a collective intake of breath, as though the entire plane was bracing itself for what was to come. Then, with a sudden burst of power, the aircraft surged forward, accelerating down the runway. Inside the cabin, the passengers felt the familiar push of gravity as the plane lifted off the ground. Some gripped their armrests tightly, while others leaned toward the windows to watch the world shrink below them. The city lights sparkled like scattered diamonds against the darkness, and the vast expanse of the night sky stretched endlessly above. Amanda noticed the young boy clutching his bear tightly, his eyes squeezed shut. She knelt beside him, her voice gentle. "You're doing great. Look out the window, see those lights? It's like a big treasure map." The boy opened his eyes hesitantly, then gasped in amazement. His mother mouthed a silent, "Thank you," to Amanda, who smiled before moving on. In the cockpit, Ethan and Olivia monitored the aircraft's ascent. The controls felt responsive, the instruments displayed green across the board, and the autopilot engaged smoothly. "Textbook takeoff," Ethan remarked, leaning back slightly. Olivia chuckled. "Let's hope the rest of the flight is just as uneventful." Back in the cabin, the atmosphere began to settle. Passengers adjusted their seats, pulled out books, or scrolled through the in-flight entertainment options. The college students in the back had shifted their attention to a card. The aircraft had reached cruising altitude, and the seatbelt signs blinked off with a soft chime. Passengers began to move about the cabin, some stretching their legs, others heading to the restrooms or striking up casual conversations with their neighbors. The atmosphere inside the plane was calm, almost serene, with the hum of the engines serving as a steady backdrop. Amanda and her team began preparing for the beverage service, their movements fluid and efficient. She wheeled the cart down the aisle, smiling warmly at each passenger as she took their orders. "Coffee? Tea? Juice?" she asked a young woman in her 20s who looked up from her book with a distracted smile. "Coffee, please," the woman replied, her tone soft. Amanda handed her the cup, noting the frayed edges of the paperback in her lap. It was a romance novel, its cover adorned with pastel hues. Further down the aisle, a businessman in a pinstripe suit waved for Amanda's attention. He asked for sparkling water, his tone brusque but not unfriendly. Amanda handed him the drink, her practiced smile unwavering. She moved on, the cart rattling gently as it rolled over the floor. In the cockpit, Ethan and Olivia maintained a watchful eye on the flight instruments. The plane was gliding smoothly through the air, and the weather radar displayed clear skies ahead. "Still textbook," Olivia commented, leaning back slightly in her seat. "Let's not jinx it," Ethan replied with a faint smirk, glancing out at the endless expanse of darkness beyond the cockpit windows. The stars were faint but visible, scattered like tiny pinpricks of light against the black canvas of the sky. Olivia chuckled, her fingers tapping idly on the armrest. "Fair point. But hey, if every flight was this smooth, our job would be a lot less stressful." Ethan nodded, his gaze drifting to the small photo clipped to the dashboard. It was a picture of his wife and daughter, both smiling brightly on a sunlit beach. He felt a pang of longing but pushed it aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. In the cabin, the beverage service continued without incident. A group of college students in the rear of the plane were debating loudly over which snacks to choose, their laughter infectious. Amanda handed them a mix of pretzels and cookies, her own smile widening in response to their enthusiasm. Near the middle of the plane, a middle-aged man sat alone, staring out the window. His expression was somber, and he barely acknowledged Amanda when she offered him a drink. "Just water," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Amanda handed him the cup, her gaze lingering for a moment before she moved on. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for the next phase of the flight. Some passengers had already begun to doze off, their heads lolling against the headrests or propped up by travel pillows. The elderly woman in business class was snoring softly, her travel guide still open in her lap. In the cockpit, Ethan and Olivia shared a brief conversation about their plans after landing in Seattle. Ethan mentioned taking his daughter to the aquarium, while Olivia spoke of a hiking trip she had planned. Their voices were light, the monotony of cruising altitude lending itself to casual banter. Then, without warning, a small blip appeared on the weather radar. Olivia frowned, leaning forward to examine it more closely. "That's strange," she muttered. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his tone immediately serious. "Not sure," Olivia replied, her fingers dancing across the controls as she adjusted the radar settings. The blip grew larger, its outline jagged and irregular. "Looks like a storm system, but it wasn't there a minute ago." Ethan's brow furrowed as he studied the display. "Could be a sudden front. Let's keep an eye on it." The calm atmosphere in the cockpit began to shift, a subtle tension creeping in. Olivia adjusted the plane's course slightly to give the storm a wide berth, but the system seemed to grow larger with each passing moment. Back in the cabin, the passengers remained blissfully unaware of the developing situation. Amanda and her team had finished the beverage service and were tidying up the galley. She noticed a middle-aged man near the window staring intently at his cup of water, his hands trembling slightly. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked gently. He looked up, startled, and forced a faint smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just not a fan of flying." Amanda nodded, her tone reassuring. "You're in good hands. Captain Riley and the crew are some of the best." The man nodded but didn't respond, his gaze drifting back to the window. In the cockpit, the storm system loomed on the radar, its shape jagged and menacing. Ethan tightened his grip on the controls. "This is escalating faster than expected," he said, his voice steady but firm. We'll need to adjust altitude to try and avoid the worst of it. Olivia nodded, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. I'm alerting air traffic control about the deviation. Her voice carried the precision of experience, but the faint edge of tension betrayed her awareness of the storm's unpredictability. The plane began its subtle climb, and the cabin lights flickered momentarily. Passengers looked up from their books and devices, some exchanging nervous glances. Amanda, standing near the galley, felt the faint shudder of turbulence ripple through the plane. She instinctively reached for the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some mild turbulence as we navigate a weather system. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Her tone was calm and practiced, but she couldn't ignore the growing unease in her chest. The first jolt of real turbulence came moments later, rattling the plane enough to elicit gasps from the passengers. Drinks spilled, trays shifted, and the young boy clutching his bear began to cry. Amanda crouched beside him, her voice soft and soothing. It's okay, sweetheart. This happens sometimes. Just hold on to your bear and stay buckled in. You're safe. In the cockpit, the turbulence was more than just an inconvenience, it was a battle. The storm had grown larger and more volatile than the radar initially indicated. Sheets of rain lashed against the windshield, and flashes of lightning illuminated the cockpit in stark, fleeting bursts. Wind shear warning, Olivia said sharply, her eyes fixed on the instruments. I see it, Ethan replied, adjusting the plane's pitch to counteract the sudden drops in altitude. The controls felt heavier in his hands, the aircraft responding sluggishly as it fought against the storm's fury. The cabin shook violently, and Amanda braced herself against the seat back. Overhead compartments rattled ominously, and a few unsecured items tumbled into the aisle. The businessman in the suit clutched his armrest, his laptop forgotten. The elderly woman in business class murmured a prayer under her breath, her hands gripping the armrests tightly. The intercom crackled, and Ethan's voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're encountering severe weather, but I want to assure you that we are trained for situations like this. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll do everything we can to get through this safely. The words were meant to comfort, but the relentless shaking of the plane made it hard for anyone to feel at ease. Another jolt hit, this one stronger than the last, and the plane dipped sharply before leveling out. A panic scream echoed through the cabin, and Amanda quickly moved to reassure the passengers. Her own fear was buried beneath years of training, her focus on maintaining a sense of calm. In the cockpit, Olivia's voice cut through the roar of the storm. We're losing altitude, engines aren't responding as they should. Ethan's jaw tightened. Diverting to the nearest airport. We need to get out of this storm before it overwhelms us. Olivia pulled up a map of nearby airfields. Closest is about 40 miles east. Not ideal, but it's our best shot. Do it, Ethan said, his hands steady on the yoke. Back in the cabin, Amanda felt the plane begin to bank sharply. The passengers looked around nervously, their faces pale in the dim light. The young boy held his bear tightly, his mother whispering reassurances in his ear. Amanda reached for the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're making an emergency diversion to ensure everyone's safety. Please remain seated, and follow all instructions from the crew. The words hung in the air as the plane continued its battle against the storm. Rain and wind pounded relentlessly against the fuselage, and the turbulence seemed to grow more violent with every passing second. In the cockpit, alarms began to blare. Engine 2's losing power, Olivia said, her voice tight with urgency. Shut it down and redirect thrust to the remaining engines, Ethan ordered. The plane shuddered as Olivia executed the command, the loss of an engine further complicating their already dire situation. Ethan glanced at her, their eyes meeting in unspoken determination. They had trained for this, and now, every ounce of that training was being put to the test. The storm showed no signs of relenting, and the plane was rapidly approaching the limits of its endurance. The distant lights of the emergency airfield flickered faintly through the rain-streaked windshield, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. Ethan's voice was calm but commanding as he spoke into the intercom. Prepare for an emergency landing. Amanda and her team moved quickly, securing loose items and ensuring that every passenger was strapped.